Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unraveling a massive historiographical mystery, the fall of the mighty Mughal Empire and the dramatic transformation of 18th century India. For a really long time, history painted this era in very stark black and white terms. But as you'll see, the reality is far more complex, totally fascinating, and still fiercely debated by modern historians.
Think about it. What actually happens when a massive empire just dies? Does society completely collapse into dust, or does it morph into something entirely new? For India, the definitive catalyst for this question was the year 1707. That's the year Emperor Aurangzeb died, triggering an immense socio-political shift that would permanently alter the destiny of the subcontinent and really set the stage for global colonialism.
Okay, let's dive into this. First, we'll look at how the Mughal Empire crumbled. Then, examine the traditional Dark Age hypothesis. Third, we'll explore the counter-perspective. Was it actually an era of growth? And finally, we'll synthesize all of this into the resulting colonial power vacuum.
Starting with Part 1, the Mughal Empire crumbles after 1707.
So picture the empire in the early 1700s like a critically ill patient. The real roots of this decline stem from a drastic policy shift. You see, Akbar the Great originally unified a super diverse population through religious toleration and meritocracy. Aurangzeb, however, reversed all of that. He reinstated the jizya tax on non-Muslims, alienated crucial Rajput allies, and basically fractured the empire's vital social alliances.
But hey, the fractures weren't just social. They were intensely economic and military. Aurangzeb became completely obsessed with expanding southward. These decades-long Deccan campaigns literally drained the imperial treasury dry. Worse, because he couldn't decisively crush his enemies in the south, the Mughal military lost its precious aura of invincibility. Combine an empty treasury with a military that suddenly looks beatable, and what do you get? Widespread peasant unrest, things like the Jat and Satnami rebellions, which were fueled by heavy taxation. Add in brutal wars of succession between royal brothers every single time a ruler died, and the empire was basically burning from the inside out.
Now, to really grasp the collapse, we have to look at the Mughal administrative backbone, the Mansabdari system. Introduced way back in 1571, this system assigned officials a dual rank. Your Zat was your personal rank, dictating your pay and status, and your Sawar dictated the number of cavalry troops you are obligated to maintain for the emperor. It was an incredibly efficient way to organize a massive military bureaucracy. Well, as long as you actually had the money to pay them.
So the crucial point is the Jagirdari crisis. To pay these Mansabdars, the empire would grant them the revenue of a piece of land, known as a jagir. But by the end of Aurangzeb's reign, he had appointed way too many officials trying to buy loyalties. Suddenly, there was a severe scarcity of pai baki, which is the land actually available to grant. The empire had basically written more checks than its geography could cash, and this completely crippled the economic structure.
The aftermath of this economic breakdown was utter chaos at the top. You had faction-ridden nobles, most famously the Sayyid brothers, acting as kingmakers, manipulating the throne for their own greed. The successors to Aurangzeb were incredibly weak, entirely incapable of controlling distant provinces. And, smelling blood in the water, foreign invaders with advanced artillery like Nader Shah and Ahmad Shah Abdali just swept in. They sacked Delhi, plundered the wealth, and completely eroded any remaining Mughal authority.
Which brings us to Part 2, the Dark Age hypothesis, a century of chaos.
Let's look at the academic consensus that shaped this view. Historians like K.M. Ashraf viewed the 18th century as displaying symptoms of social parasitism and decay. Irfan Habib characterized it as a period of reckless rapine, anarchy, and foreign conquest. For these scholars, a massive indicator of this instability was the widespread rise of ijara, or revenue farming, where the state basically auctioned off tax collection rights to the highest bidder, heavily exploiting the peasantry.
But we need to remember, this decline wasn't just some abstract economic theory found in ledgers. It was a deeply felt, traumatic cultural tragedy for the people actually living through it, particularly the elites and artists who watched the glorious imperial cities of Agra and Delhi literally crumble around them.
The poetry of the time captures this mourning perfectly. The great poet Mir Taqi Mir looked at Delhi, often called Jahanabad, and lamented. Now Jahanabad is in ruins. Otherwise, there had been a house at every step. You can just hear the profound heartbreak for a lost golden age in those words.
And it wasn't just physical ruin. It was a terrifying perceived societal collapse. Contemporary writer Jafar Zatali wrote, "These are peculiar times. where there is no friendship. Only the low caste prosper. This reveals a deep sense of social inversion and fear among the old elites. Their world was turning upside down, and to them, it felt like the end of days.
Now let's shift gears entirely for part 3, or an era of growth, the century of continuity.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how we reframe the narrative. Yes, the central hubs of Delhi and Agra suffered terribly from raids and the loss of imperial patronage, but power and wealth didn't just vanish into thin air, they simply decentralized. As the center collapsed, vibrant new regional centers like Awadh, Bengal, and Hyderabad didn't just survive, they flourished, absorbing the artisans, merchants, and wealth fleeing the capital.
Modern historians actually paint a completely different picture. C.A. Bailey argues that Mughal institutions didn't die out, they survived with clever regional modifications. Satish Chandra points out that the destructive impact of warfare has been highly exaggerated and that regional growth was quite robust. Muzaffar Alam goes even further, stating there was unmistakable, documented economic growth in places like Awadh and the Punjab during this exact same time.
These new independent riyasats, the regional states, actually possessed highly stable, integrated marketing systems. In fact, some historians suggest that the so-called anarchy of the 18th century was partly a deliberate smokescreen. Think about it, a clever attempt by savvy regional rulers to hide their true wealth and resources from the encroaching colonial powers.
And the concrete examples of this continuity are everywhere. The Jat territories under Badan Singh, they were yielding double the revenue they had previously. When old trade routes near Delhi became unsafe due to raids, commerce didn't stop. New trade routes simply emerged, like the thriving path from Malwa to Indore to Banaras. The textile industry expanded rapidly, and brilliant new cultural centers like Lucknow rose to take the place of Delhi. Society wasn't dying, it was adapting.
Finally, part 4, the colonial power vacuum, the East India Company.
Here's the catch. The decline of a unified center ultimately invited unprecedented colonial extraction. The regional rulers, while wealthy, were fiercely competitive with one another. To fund their local wars, they often imposed heavy taxes and occasionally disrupted traditional routes. This lack of continental unity allowed the commercial interests of the British and French to aggressively encroach, playing local rulers against each other.
And this brilliantly illustrates the horrific cost of that encroachment. 4 crore rupees. To put that into perspective, that's about £4 million sterling. According to historical estimates, by the 1780s and 90s, this was the mind-boggling amount of annual tribute being ruthlessly drained out of India's economy and sent directly to Britain. The wealth that had decentralized into the regions was now being siphoned out of the subcontinent entirely.
So, to synthesize what we've covered today, the 18th century wasn't merely the tragic death of the Mughal Empire. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't solely a happy birth of regional prosperity either. It was a massive, turbulent geopolitical transition. The regional growth was absolutely real, but the political fragmentation ultimately opened the door, paving the way for 2 centuries of British colonialism.
Which leaves us with this final, really provocative thought to ponder. When we look back at these incredibly complex periods of historical transition, filled with simultaneous destruction and creation, do we categorize them as an end or a beginning? The 18th century in India was profoundly both. I hope this explainer helped you see the brilliant shades of gray in this historical mystery. Keep questioning,